So in this lesson, we're gonna start word problems. And there's 3 steps that we're gonna take, but there are gonna be 4 types. The first type of problem is finding 2 numbers. So in other words, they'll tell you, say, a large and a small number, and they'll tell you what they equal together, whether you're adding them or subtracting them, and then you have to plug in one answer to find the second answer, okay? The second type will be perimeter problems. Now, with perimeter problems, they expect that you know how to find the perimeter. And so I'm just gonna give you the formula, which the perimeter of a rectangle, so again, if you're given a rectangle, you've got your width and your length, but you have to remember that they have 2 widths and 2 lengths, because there's 4 sides. So we're always gonna do 2 times the width plus 2 times the length, okay? So you're gonna be expected to know this perimeter formula for a rectangle. Another type is finding consecutive numbers. So when I say consecutive, I'm talking about numbers in a row. So I'm just gonna say numbers in a row. Now there's different types of consecutive numbers. Now plain old consecutive numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth, it's just one right after each other. But even starts with an even number and goes every 2. So for example, if I did start with 2, the next even number is 4, then 6, then 8, but they're always gonna be 2 apart. Now odd numbers are also 2 apart, but we're gonna use, so for example, start with 1, that's the smallest positive odd number, 1, then 3, then 5, then 7. So 5 and 7 are consecutive odd numbers, just like 6 and 8 are consecutive even numbers, okay? But just 4 and 5 are consecutive numbers, okay? So we're gonna do that. And then, actually, I think there's only 3 types. I was thinking that there were 4, unless I skipped a page. Nope, there's only 3. Okay, so, all right. There are 3 steps that I'm gonna have you do for each one of these problems, okay? So, step 1, when we say declare variables, it's the let statement. That's what we're gonna define our variables, okay? So we need to define what the x or n or whatever variable you use, what that's gonna be, okay? So step 2, when we say set up your equation and solve, basically you're gonna write the equation and then obviously you'll solve it to find what x equals, okay? Now step 3, when it says define your answer, basically you need to label the units, okay? So I always say, when you're labeling your units, actually, basically you're gonna check step 1. So where you define your variables, basically you're gonna let x equal something and maybe 2x plus 5 equals something, okay? You always go back to step 1 to check if you have the correct label. All right, so now let's talk about these 3 different types. So for number 1, it says the larger of 2 numbers is 4 more than the smaller number. If the sum of the number is 74, find the 2 numbers. Okay, so first of all, step 1 is found in this first sentence, okay, for this type of problem when you're finding 2 numbers. So anytime it says find the numbers, it's this type, okay? So step 1, where it says the larger number, I'm just gonna put, so let's let, that's what I mean by let, we're basically defining what the large number is according to that first sentence. So the larger of the two numbers is, that's your equals, 4 more, so 4 plus the smaller number. Well, we're just going to say x is the smaller number. So we just have to say the small is x. Okay. Now, the second sentence, where it tells us if the sum of the number is 74, this right here is step 2, where we're going to write the equation. So we take this information. So basically, if we're going to do the large number plus the small number, that's going to equal 74, but we can't use large plus small. We're going to use the 4 plus x plus the small number, which is x, equals 74. The biggest mistake I see is people just put the large number, 4 plus x equals 74, and they forget that they have to add the small number also. Now we just go and do our steps, like combining like terms, so x plus x is 2x, and then positive 4, I'm just going to put plus 4 equals 74. We know we have to subtract 4 on both sides. And if you need to, again, you can draw a line showing the left side separate from the right side. So we have all our variables on the left, so 2x equals, and 74 minus 4 is 70. Divide by 2, and x equals 35. Okay. Now, here, maybe I'll do this. This is step 1. This whole part, I'm just going to do this since this is the equation, and then show the arrow, because the arrow just shows all the work. And then step 3, label your units. Well, we got to check step 1. Well, step 1, we need both the large number and the small. Guess what? The 35 is the small number, so we're going to say that's the small number. Okay, so that's one answer. But we also need the large number, which means we have to add 4 to our small number. So basically, what's 35 plus 4? Well, that's 39. So that's our second answer. So when I say check step 1, you want to check these to make sure that you have the correct answer labels. We need to know what the small number is. We need to know what the large number is. Okay? So let's do... It says the larger of the two numbers is 6 less than twice the smaller number. The sum of the numbers is 42. Find the numbers. Well, again, this first sentence is always going to be part of step 1, okay, when you're trying to find two numbers. So that tells us the sum of the two numbers is 42 is going to help us for step 2. And then step 3, actually I could go back here and say, see how it says find the numbers? That's how we know there's more than one answer. We couldn't just say X. That's going to be our step 3. So this part, the fact that they tell you to find the numbers and it's plural, means that there's going to be more than one answer. All right, so let's go back to step 1. It says the larger of the two numbers. So I'm going to say let's let the large number is, so that's the equals, 6 less, remember that's the turnaround, 6 less from subtraction, then twice the smaller. So I'm just going to write 2x, and I'm just going to say, oh, well then the small number is just x. Okay. So when it says twice the smaller number, we don't know what the smaller number is. That's why we just write x for the small number. So that's step 1. All right, so step 2, we use this. The sum of the numbers is 42. So we have to add both 2x minus 6 and x. So it's 2x minus 6 plus x is 42. Okay? That's the sum of the two numbers, because here's your small, here's your large, and that gives us the whole equation. Now we just solve. So you collect like terms. So the 2x plus x is 3x minus 6 equals 42. We add the 6, and then those eliminate, so we have 3x equals 48, divide by 3, and x equals 16. Now remember what I said about defining the answer. And you always want to check step 1. So step 1 and what I highlighted where it says find the numbers and it's plural, that means you have two answers. Well, just plain x, we know that this is the small number, so that's one answer, but then we have to plug it in. To find the large number, we have to plug 16 in, and we have to do 2 times 16 minus 6. So 2 times 16 minus 6, well, that's 32 minus 6, so I'm just going to tell you is 26. You might have to use a calculator, but basically, like here, you could write it on this side. So 32 minus 6, that's where you get 26. Okay, regardless. Okay, so go ahead and do 3. Now, look at number 5. So now we're back to type 2. Well, what if they're all mixed up? As soon as you see something where it talks about perimeter, you have to use this formula. Okay, this is your perimeter formula, and you know it's this type of equation. All right, so if we read this, first of all, it says the length of a rectangle is 6 inches more than its width. Well, guess what? That's step 1. Okay. Then it says the perimeter of the rectangle is 24 inches. That's step 2. And we have to use this. So this formula is always going to be for step 2 when you write the equation. Okay. And then the final step 3, it says find its dimensions. Now, dimensions is just saying find the width and find the length. Okay. So, all right, let's do step 1. It says, so we're going to it says length, so the length of the rectangle is, that's the equals, 6 inches more than its width. So I'm just going to put W for width. So then down here, width is just going to be W. Okay, so that's step 1. Now, step 2. The 2W is always going to stay the same, but the L, the 2L, we're going to put parentheses and plug in what we put from step 1. Okay, so here where we have the perimeter 2W equals 2W plus 2L, the 2W is going to stay the same because it's just plain W for width anyways. But 2L, we need to do 2 parentheses and 6 plus W, and we're going to end up distributing. Now, the problem tells us the perimeter is 24, so I'm going to replace P with 24, so we know 24 is, and then remember I said we keep the 2W because we have 2 widths, there's 2 widths in the rectangle, plus 2 times the length, so we have to put parentheses 6 plus W, okay? So step 2 for perimeter problems is always using this formula and plugging in your length with parentheses because you're going to end up, we're going to distribute this. So we have 24 equals 2W plus 12 plus 2W. Well, that's just going to give us 4W plus 12, and then I'm just more comfortable having the constant term on the right, plus we want to keep the habit of variables on the left, especially when we get to inequalities. So we're going to subtract 12 on both sides. So we get 4W equals 12, because 24 minus 12, divide by 4, and we say W is 3, okay? Now, remember we said on step 1 or step 3, we need to check step 1. So we got the W, but now we need to add 6 to find the length. So then our length, and I'm just going to do it up here, is going to be 3 plus 6, which is 9. But there's one extra step, okay? The label has to match the label in the problem. So actually the length is 9 inches, so that's one answer, and the width is 3 inches, that's your second answer. So not only do you want to check step 1 when you're doing your final answer to make sure you have your both answers, but check the label in the problem. Okay. Now let's look at, I want to do, let's do number 7. Okay, and then you're going to do 6, 8, and 9 on your own. So if we read this, it says the length of a rectangle is 3 centimeters less than its width. Okay, that's going to be step 1. That's what we need to define our variables, okay? If the perimeter of the rectangle is 18 centimeters, So that's step 2. Remember we said step 2 we have to use the formula. Then we find its dimensions. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and highlight that centimeters is what we're going to need for our final answer. Okay? So let's do step 1. And then the length is 3 centimeters less than, so it's minus 3, twice the width. Well, that's 2W. Remember, less than is the turnaround words for subtraction. And then width is just plain old W. Okay, so that's step 1. Okay. Now back to step 2, perimeter of the rectangle is 18 centimeters. Well, since I'm used to having the constant on the right side, let's just put the 18 on the right side. And then up here we have the 2W always stays the same, plus 2 parentheses. Now I just plug in what I have for step 1 on the length, which is 2W minus 3. Okay, so that's your step 2. But now we have to finish step 2 by solving. So we're going to distribute that 2, so we have 2W plus 4W plus, minus, since positive 2 times negative 3 is negative 6 equals 18. I'm going to combine like terms, the W's, and I'm going to go ahead and add 6 all in the same step. So at this step, I get 6W equals, well, 18 plus 6 is 24. And then, boy, I kind of ran out of room. Divide by 6, and you get W equals 4. So we're almost there, though, because remember I said on step 3, you have to check your step 1. So this is one of our answers, but we have to label it centimeters. But now we have to do our length and plug in 4 for the W. So we get 2 times 4 minus 3, or that's 8 minus 3. So the length is actually going to be 5 centimeters. But you have to remember that you label it with the correct units, okay? In fact, so go ahead and pause the video and do 6, and then 8 and 9, and then check the answer key. Okay, so step 3. By the way, guys, if any of the other problems are confusing and it doesn't make sense, make sure you ask me questions in class. But for consecutive numbers, we notice that each of the consecutive numbers are only 1 apart. So since they're 1 apart, for step 1, so I'm going to do, this is kind of like a step 1 table for these type of problems. So what you're going to do, I'm just going to kind of create an extra little table. So for consecutive numbers in step 1, you're going to let the first number equal x. The second number is going to be x plus 1 because it's 1 apart. Now, if they ever want a third number, it's going to be x plus 2 because you keep adding 1 each time. So like, if x is 1, 1 plus 2 is 2. Then the next number is only 1 more. So add 1, that's 3. Or you could do 1 plus 2 is 3. And then say the fourth number would be x plus 3 and so on because you're adding 1 every time. And I'm just going to put a dot, dot, dot because it could go on forever. Now, if you notice about even and odd numbers, they're both 2 apart. So they're going to look the same over here except for even numbers problems, x will always be even. And for odd numbers, x will always end up solving to get an odd number. But our let statements are going to look the same. So like the first number is just going to be plain x. The second number is going to be x plus 2. Because it's 2 apart, whereas if they're plain old consecutive, it was only plus 1 because it was just 1 apart. But even numbers are 2 apart. So then say you had a third number, it would have to be x plus 4 because you have to add 2 each time. Or if it was, If it was a fourth number that you're looking for, it would be x plus 6, because and I'm just going to put dot, 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 because you always do the first number, you just keep adding 2 each time. Well, consecutive odd numbers are the same. The only difference is up here for even, this x and all these other x's, you're going to solve and it'll be even number. But if it's odd, your first number is always going to equal x. The second number will be x plus 2 because they're still 2 apart, but the x will be odd. Then your third number will still be x plus 4, but 4. But an odd number plus 4 is going to stay odd, just like an odd number plus 2 is going to stay odd. And then if you had to find a fourth number, it would be x plus 6, dot, 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 because x would be odd, and an odd number plus 6 would still be an odd number. But we do this because they're also 2 apart, like 3 plus 2 is 5, 5 plus 2 is 7. Or you could think 1 plus 2 is 3, 1 plus 4 is 5, 1 plus 6 is 7. So that's your first, second, third, fourth number. Okay, so this part, for step 1, you're going to have to memorize. There's just no way around it. I'm sorry. You're just going to be expected to know this from here on out, even to have this down for like Algebra 2, Pre-Calc, and any other time that they have this. Okay, you're just going to have that memorized. So step 1 for these type of problems is from this table. Okay, so step 1, I'm just going to basically highlight whether it's consecutive, consecutive even, or consecutive odd. Okay, so like in number 10, I don't even need to read the whole thing. It says plain old consecutive numbers, so it'll be these statements. Like number 11, it says consecutive numbers. Again, plain old consecutive numbers, it's going to be one of these. But notice number 12, it says consecutive even numbers. So our step 1 will be from these. Okay? And then if it says in number 13 consecutive odd, we're going to be using these for step 1. So in fact, you're just using a key word in step 1 to tell you which ones you're going to define. So for example, like in number 10, we're going to let the first number equal x. That's always going to be the case. The second number, because they're plain old consecutive, is just x plus 1, because they're 1 apart. And notice it just has 2 numbers, so we just have our first and a second. So that's our first step. Now our second step is part of the first sentence. Well, the sum of the 2 numbers, in other words, we have to do the first plus the second, is 123. Well, we said the first is x plus, but the second is x plus 1 equals 123. Again, the biggest mistake I see on these is people will just see an x and do x plus 1 equals 123, but they forget the first number. And that's wrong because it's the sum of the 2 numbers. So we have to add both. Okay? So this is for our step 2. And then we just go ahead and combine like terms. So we have 2x plus 1 equals 123, subtract 1. So we get 2x equals 122 divided by 2. And x, which is the first number, if you divide this out, is 61. Well, I can just do mental math and just know that, okay, well, since this is the first number, then mental math, the second number is just 1 more, so that's 62. I don't even have to plug it in. Okay, so that's, but again, we need to, okay, so that's, but again, we need to check your step 1 so that you know that you're looking for 2 answers. And actually up here, the fact that it says find the numbers plural tells you there's more than 1 answer. And you always want to go back and check your step 1, because actually in these, you could be finding 3 numbers or 4 numbers or 5 numbers, okay? Now, I actually want to skip down to number 13, where it says the sum of 2 consecutive odd numbers is 128, okay? Well, first of all, we're going to let the first number be plain old x. The second number, because we're only finding 2 numbers, if you remember up here, we said the odd numbers are 2 apart. So the second number is x plus 2. So we're going to write x plus 2. All right, so that's step 1. Okay. Now, step 2, remember I said, so sum means we're going to add both numbers and it has to equal 128. And remember, you have to add both numbers, so it has to be x plus 2 is 128. So that's our step 2. Okay. So then we just go ahead and combine like terms. So 2x plus 2 equals 128. Subtract 2. So 2x equals 126. Divide by 2. And, oops, I'll write it over here. X, which ends up being 63, is our first number. Okay? And guess what? It was odd, so that worked out. And I'm just going to do mental math for the second number and add 2 is 65. Or you could just think, okay, after 63, the next odd number is 65. And again, for step 3, just check. Did we find the 2 numbers? Yep. Okay. All right. Now, you're going to do the same thing for these 2. And the challenge, I want you to really try, even if you're worried about word problems, just see what you can do. Now, notice on 14 and 15, they say the sum of 3 consecutive numbers. So let's do 15 together. Oh, wait, it's consecutive even. So remember how I said the even numbers are going to be 2 apart? But this time there's 3 of them. So we're going to let the first number be x, the second number be x plus 2, because remember we said even numbers were 2 apart, and the third number is going to be x plus 4, just like we saw in this table here. So the first would be x, the second is x plus 2, and the third is x plus 4. So this is step 1. Now, step 2 is, well, sum of the 3 numbers. That just means we're going to add all 3 of these is 138. Now let me show you a little trick. Since we're going to add all these, I'm just going to go ahead and combine like terms right in the way I wrote them in step 1. And I have x plus x plus x. Well, that's just 3x. And then 2 plus 4 is 6 is 138. That's one thing. Maybe over here in the previous step, maybe we could have done that over here too. Maybe instead of writing x plus 2 equals 128, we could have just combined, well, x plus x is 2x. We still have the plus 2 equals 128. That might actually help. I just thought of that. Okay. Anyways, so back to this. So we're going to go ahead, subtract 6 on both sides. So we have 3x equals 132. Divide by 3. So x is going to be, what is it? 3 goes in 13, 12, 44. Okay. So that's one number. That's actually your first. Now remember I said check your answers, find the numbers, but this time there's 3 answers. Okay? So I could just mental math say, well, what's the next 2 evens? Well, 46 and 48. So we know that's the second, and this is the third. And then here are all of the answers. Okay? So again, go back. I want you to finish 11, 12, and 15 and the challenge, and then check the answer key at the back.